I'd like to welcome you all back to my next episode of Béaloideas Folklore Now. My name is Richard Blake, and today is George Washington's birthday, so I felt compelled or inspired, I guess you could say, to sit down here and talk a little bit about this subject. Now, it would take hours and days of constant talk to really actually do justice to anything dealing with George Washington. But what I'm going to talk about today, though, has to do with George Washington's birthday and kind of the things that people have done over time, especially with me and my family over the years, as it relates to George Washington's birthday. And the reason why I bring that up is there has always been a sort of kind of traditional thing that everyone does, in America anyway, when it comes to George Washington's birthday. That is one of those days in which you have the American flag up. Now, the way they do it now, technically, is they have something called President's Day, where they sort of mesh together two presidents' birthdays that we used to celebrate individually on their birthdays, but now they have come up with this idea of President's Day, and I guess you honor all presidents with that. Though, when I was younger, of course, what we did was on every year on February 12th, we celebrated Abraham Lincoln's birthday, and then on February 22nd, we celebrated George Washington's birthday. As that relates to school, one of the interesting things that happened was whenever that day came around, no matter what day of the week it was, Monday through Friday, we always had that day off from school. When it got to Saturday and Sunday, that's when they started doing the weekend thing, of course. It wasn't until much later that they actually decided to just say, okay, this is the president's weekend or whatever. So on Lincoln's birthday first and then Washington's birthday, if it was a Wednesday, everything was shut down on that Wednesday. There was no school on Wednesday. You went to school on Monday and Tuesday, then you didn't have school on Wednesday, and then you went back to school on Thursday and Friday and so forth. And even if it fell on a Tuesday, you have your weekend, you do Monday school, and then you have the day off because it's George Washington or Abraham Lincoln's birthday. And that kind of had a mixed sort of bag feeling to it when you think about it. It's like, gee, it would be nice to have a 3-day weekend or something like that. But then at other times when I stop and think about it, I would say, you know what, I kind of like the idea of, okay, Monday's coming around, it's school, Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday I have off from school. Then Thursday I go back to school, Friday I go to school, and then, Saturday and Sunday I have off from school. So I only had, it felt kind of like you had 2 days, a break, 2 days, and then another break, and it was just kind of a really nice thing. Of course, that's only when it fell on Wednesday. If it fell on Thursday, you had a little bit of a different thing, but you get the idea. And of course, we did this for both George Washington and Abraham Lincoln on their specific birthdays. As time progressed, of course, they came up with the inspiring solution that, you know what, for the sake of sanity and for efficiency, I don't know if this is how they said it, but this is kind of my interpretation of it. For the sake of sanity and efficiency, let's just make it a 3-day weekend for both of those holidays, for both of those birthdays, whenever the week is that the president has their birthday, we will have a 3-day weekend. So they started doing that, and then I guess they just suddenly decided, you know what, we're not going to have two holidays 10 days apart from each other in the single month. We'll just kind of clam it together. And for a time, they actually had a situation where people would have both Friday and then the following Monday off from school and other things. I do not know how all employers did it. I'm not even sure how all government institutions necessarily did it. I'm guessing that the post office was probably shut down on that Friday and that Monday. I'm not sure. I'd have to check with some historical facts to confirm that. I will check it out at some point and maybe follow up here on another podcast episode. But as it relates to these particular types of things, as a kid, you almost always were just thinking about, it's a holiday and I get this day off from school. It's not until much older that you really start appreciating what it is that you're really celebrating. Now, some places, they actually did kind of reenactments of things. I did not live in one of those areas, unfortunately, though I did see some reenactments here and there on TV, or that I heard some people talking about where they do performances and things. And some of that, was really kind of interesting. Some people go really all out to make sure that you are going to remember what it is that we're commemorating. You are commemorating the first president of the United States. You are commemorating the person who led us through many, many years of toxic, horrific conflict. And if you've ever read the journals of George Washington, you'd know that there are so many things that he endured, but he had faith that what he was doing, he was fighting for a good cause, and he was getting everyone through it. And, despite what you might hear from anyone else, George Washington was a very religious person, and he did feel like this is something, that God has inspired me to do, despite all these setbacks that I'm getting, despite, the horrors of, at Valley Forge, where you're trying to survive a winter. Who knows if you're going to even have an army once that winter is over. And you see defeat after defeat happening when it comes to different battles that took place. You hear about, what happens when George Washington crosses the Delaware, and really his crossing of the Delaware saved on that Christmas Eve. When he crossed the Delaware and attacked the British encampment, which was mostly Hessian mercenaries at that time, and he attacked that particular encampment on Christmas night, that was something completely unexpected and unheard of, to be going and fighting like that on a holiday. And they were certainly not ready for this attack when it came. Really, that victory, if it was not for that victory, the Continentals may not have been able to keep pushing the war on, to continue pushing the war, to be convincing the people to put in the money, to put in the manpower in order to make the sacrifices necessary to win. And another thing that you will note if you read any history books on the topic is that, they had to go through the Continental Congress, of course, in order to get money, to have money and supplies prepared so that they can continue to survive, to keep the army together. And there was constant nagging and arguments, discussions about, whether or not, how you're going to feed the army, you're going to keep it together, how much money are you going to spend, are we actually going to keep pushing this? Is this a cause that is worth it to keep going? And in hindsight, a lot of times we don't always appreciate exactly what it is that these people were going through. We just know that a revolution happened and it was successful, and now we have what we have today. Unfortunately, there's just too much instances where we don't appreciate what people have done for us in the past. We kind of know what the result is. We don't understand each of the different things that occurred. So as it relates to George Washington, of course, there are a lot of legends, of course, that came out about him. There is actually a story about his ghost haunting Mount Vernon. And for some reason, I heard somewhere that let's just say I've read things that talk about where George Washington might be haunting. One of them is Mount Vernon, but for some reason Martha's Vineyard is not on that list. I guess George kind of had too much respect for his wife, and he didn't want to be bugging the people there. As it goes with ghosts, it's like, well, how can the same ghost be haunting this place and this place? Who can say? There are many places where certain people are supposed to haunt, several different places. I will have to ask one of my fellow folklorists who are more experts in this matter than I am, though I have done a bit of research on it, as to how the same ghost can haunt so many different places. Are they in the same place are they in different places at the same time, or is there some little trick to it? Or am I being hyper analytical and not just accepting that this is a story, and as stories go, you take them as you get them, and you might embellish them yourself, but then that means that you are a storyteller and you're not a folklorist. Or you're a folklorist who is a storyteller and not one that is necessarily just preserving what has passed down to us over the ages. As it relates to George Washington, though, there's also the story of the cherry tree, where he is supposed to have chopped down his father's favorite cherry tree, and unfortunately, and the father, of course, says, "George, did you cut down this tree?" And he said, "Yes, and yes, Father, I cut down the tree." And therefore, his father rewarded him for being honest. As it so happens, it is believed that that is a fable. That is not something that really happened. It is certainly a nice idea, and it is to teach a good lesson to people to really appreciate, being honest, how good that is, and see that even under dire circumstances, you should always be honest and trustworthy about what you are doing. One of the funny things that I came across dealing with this, and a part of me kind of is thinking, oh, it'd be interesting if I can get this Sesame Street episode on here and attach it so that you can hear it. But Sesame Street did a kind of skit where they had Kermit the Frog, who always goes and interviews people, if you watch that show, and Kermit was interviewing George Washington's father, and he was saying, "Yes, I rewarded my son for being honest about what he did." And he says, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down this tree." And Kermit's sitting there, and that, and you're okay with that? You don't care that he does that? It's like, oh, no, just as long as he's honest. And so George goes and he keeps chopping down more trees, and coming back to his father and says, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down this tree," or whatever. And then finally he chops down five, or, eventually he chops down so many, and the father's like, "Oh, for heaven's sakes," So he finally runs out and stops him from chopping down more cherry trees. And it's just really interesting, of course, what comes up story-wise, how people embellish stories that have come down to us. And at some point, this story about the cherry tree dates back at least to World War II. I'm going to see, of course, if it goes back earlier than that. I should have done a lot more research. I did some research before talking here, but I should have done a lot more research before talking to you about this story. But I wanted to do this on George Washington's birthday because I think it's really important. When I was growing up, it was always embedded into me how important he was. And though he had his flaws, he is still someone who was really instrumental. He was a very good character, and he helped to bring our country out of a very dark episode into one leading towards the light, so to speak. Of course, there were a whole slew of problems that came about after our independence. And of course, there's he was made our first president because he was really the only one everyone respected. He was the only one that got a unanimous vote out of the Electoral College. And of course, it's never been like that again. So he had to put down 2 rebellions, and he had to kind of steer things in certain directions. He took advice from a lot of people around him because he understood that he did not know everything. But of course, he had to be strong enough to say, I'm the one in charge. This is your advice, but this is what I'm going to be doing. So George Washington, someone to always, we always should appreciate everything that all of the good things that people have done for us to help guide us into the right direction. So anyway, that is everything I'm going to talk to you about right now. I have something else that I'm going to talk about on another episode. I'm going to make sure that I have enough information to make it work this time, because it is something that I think is also really important, that we appreciate what people. It's another thing where I'm trying to emphasize how we should appreciate what people have done for us over the years and what we owe to people, a lot of people that we really don't always notice or don't pay attention to, though without them, the world would not be the way it is. A lot of times I think we've gotten kind of soft over the years and don't really appreciate how hard things can really be. After COVID, that was certainly a very horrendous situation. But despite COVID, there were still people who had to keep working, because if they were not working, you would not have what you need to survive. I will talk about that topic then on the next episode. And I hope everybody had a nice President's Day weekend, whenever that was for you. It certainly wasn't this last weekend when George Washington's birthday was, or it wasn't today. President's Day weekend that was Monday. So anyways, have a wonderful day. And until next time, I bid thee adieu.